Welcome to Deep Dive into the life of Nick Civella, the notorious boss of the Kansas City crime family. From his early days, to controlling the Teamsters pension fund and skimming millions from Las Vegas casinos, Civella's reign was nothing short of infamous. Nick Civella, a prominent figure in organized crime, left a lasting mark as the longtime leader of the Kansas City crime family. His life was a tapestry of crime, power, and a brief stint in politics, spanning over several decades and eventually bringing him into the national spotlight. Civella's story began on March 19, 1912, when he was born Giuseppe Nicoli Civella in the North Side, Kansas City's Italian enclave. It was a neighborhood known for its close-knit community and deep cultural roots, but also for its underworld connections. The son of Italian immigrants, Civella would grow up amidst the challenges of a rough environment that shaped his future path. By the age of 10, Civella's troubles with the law had already begun. In 1922, he was brought before local juvenile authorities for incorrigibility, marking the beginning of a pattern of criminal behavior. Shortly after this, he left school, seemingly destined for a life on the streets. Despite his lack of formal education, Civella was known in later years as a man of culture who read widely and had a passion for classical music. He was a figure who, on the surface, seemed to straddle two worlds, the cultured gentleman and the hardened criminal. Civella's criminal activities escalated as he reached his teens and early 20s. He faced multiple arrests for offenses ranging from auto theft and gambling to robbery and vagrancy. His first significant brush with the law came in 1932 when he was arrested for bootlegging during the height of Prohibition. The crime earned him a 2-month prison sentence, a relatively short punishment that marked the beginning of his deeper involvement in organized crime. Amidst his growing reputation in the criminal underworld, Civella found time for a different kind of commitment. In 1934, he married Catherine, the woman who would stand by his side for nearly 5 decades. Although the couple did not have children, their relationship was marked by a strong bond, and Civella was said to have a close and affectionate relationship with his extended family, particularly his nieces and nephews. His devotion to Catherine was one of the few constants in his turbulent life. The 1940s marked a turning point for Civella as he began to immerse himself in the political scene of Kansas City. He became a Democratic precinct worker on the North Side, where his ties to the city's political machine deepened. It was through this role that he met Charles Binaggio, the influential boss of the Kansas City crime family, who had succeeded the notorious Tom Pendergast as the leader of the city's powerful Democratic machine. This connection proved to be a stepping stone for Civella's ascent in the criminal hierarchy. Following World War II, Civella's status within the crime family rose rapidly. He took on roles of increasing responsibility, including serving as a bodyguard and chauffeur for Anthony Gizzo, a formidable enforcer who worked under Binaggio's direction in managing gambling operations across the city. Civella's loyalty and strategic acumen did not go unnoticed, and he soon found himself climbing the ranks of the organization. His involvement in both the criminal underworld and the political sphere would pave the way for his eventual rise to power, establishing him as a pivotal figure in the history of organized crime in Kansas City. In April 1950, a dramatic and bloody event shook the underworld of Kansas City. Charles Binaggio, the powerful mob boss who had wielded significant influence in the city's criminal and political arenas, was found murdered alongside his bodyguard, Charles Mad Dog Gargata, inside the 1st District Democratic Club. Their deaths sent shockwaves through both the criminal community and the local political landscape. Speculation quickly arose regarding the identity of those behind the killings, with many suspecting that Anthony Gizzo, a prominent figure in the Kansas City underworld, had a hand in orchestrating the murders. Gizzo, who had long been involved in the city's organized crime scene, was widely believed to be poised to take over the leadership of the Kansas City mob in the wake of Binaggio's death. Gizzo did indeed assume the role of boss, but his time at the top was short-lived. His reign lasted less than 3 years, as he passed away in 1953 at the relatively young age of 52, leaving the mob's leadership once again in question. Any power vacuum that may have existed following his death was quickly filled, with the criminal hierarchy re-establishing itself without much delay. Amid this turbulent time, Nick Civella emerged as a rising figure in the Kansas City crime scene. His name gained prominence during the Kefauver hearings, which were held in the city in 1950 as part of a broader national effort to expose and combat organized crime. Civella was singled out during the hearings as a figure to watch, indicating that law enforcement and the government had begun to take a serious interest in his activities. This newfound attention did not deter him, however, and in the years that followed, Civella continued to expand his influence within the underworld. A key moment in Civella's career occurred on November 14, 1957, when he was present at the infamous Mafia Summit held in Apalachin, New York. This meeting, intended as a grand gathering of the nation's top crime figures, ended disastrously when law enforcement raided the event, leading to the arrest and detention of many prominent mobsters. Civella, however, proved to be more fortunate than many of his counterparts. While others were caught in the roadblocks set up by the authorities, Civella managed to slip away, accompanied by fellow Kansas City mobster Joseph Filardo. The two men fled to a nearby town, where they hired a taxi to take them to the Binghamton Railroad station. There, they boarded the first available train, making a quick escape back to Kansas City. Civella's connections extended beyond the world of organized crime and into labor unions. In 1952, he met Roy Lee Williams, a man who would later rise to become the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. At the time of their meeting, both Civella and Williams were chairmen of Democratic political clubs in Kansas City, indicating the intertwining of political and criminal networks in the city. Years later, Williams would recount that Civella had spoken to him about the Apalachin meeting, mentioning that the attendees had discussed matters such as territory distribution and the importance of cooperation among different crime families. Despite having narrowly avoided capture at the Apalachin Summit, Civella did not entirely escape scrutiny. Several months later, while enjoying a round of golf at a local country club, he was served with a subpoena to testify before a United States Senate committee about his involvement in the meeting. Nevertheless, like most of the mobsters summoned to testify, Civella remained tight-lipped, and the investigation ultimately yielded no significant results. In 1959, Civella found himself facing legal troubles once again, this time before a grand jury in Chicago that was investigating organized crime activities across the Midwest. When questioned about the allegations, Civella dismissed the proceedings as a lot of baloney, suggesting that the government was merely trying to sensationalize the issue and paint him and his associates as infamous figures. Around this period, he also faced 2 Missouri state tax evasion cases. The first resulted in a minor conviction and a fine of $150, while the second was dismissed altogether, allowing him to continue his operations with minimal disruption. In the book, The Black Book and the Mob, authors Ronald A. Farrell and Carol Case delve into the creation of Nevada's Black Book, a list of individuals banned from entering any of the state's casinos due to their reputed ties to organized crime. According to the authors, the process that led to the initial inclusion of 11 men on this list was anything but formal. There was no official notification given, nor was there any hearing where those listed could contest their placement. All 11 were well known for their connections to organized crime, and their reputations alone were enough for them to be blacklisted. Without explicit approval from the Nevada Gaming Commission, the board and its chairman, R. J. Abaticchio, Jr., a former FBI agent, took matters into their own hands. They concluded that the individuals in question posed a serious threat to the integrity of the gaming industry and swiftly directed enforcement agents to distribute the list, referred to as the List of Excluded Persons, to all casinos licensed by the state. This move effectively banned the individuals on the list from participating in any legal gambling activities within Nevada. Nick Civella, one of the figures on this list, did not let the ban deter him from frequenting the state's casinos. As the authors recount, Civella violated the restrictions in 1974 by staying at the Dunes Hotel, a popular Las Vegas establishment, where he managed to evade detection initially by using a false name to register. His stay was anything but inconspicuous, however. Civella was treated as a distinguished guest, receiving VIP accommodations that included a special double-room suite, a supply of his preferred liquor, and fresh flowers to enhance his comfort. He was also granted free access to withdraw cash directly from the casino cage whenever he wished. These luxuries were extended to him despite the fact that his presence at the hotel was strictly prohibited by the Black Book. The regulatory authorities, suspecting that the hotel's management had knowingly conspired to conceal Civella's true identity, did not take the violation lightly. Believing that the Dunes had deliberately facilitated his stay and disregarded the state's restrictions, regulators took punitive action against the hotel. This incident highlighted the ongoing challenge of enforcing the Black Book's exclusions, especially when influential mob figures like Civella were involved. Years before this incident, in 1966, Civella had found himself in the spotlight once again, this time in connection with a legal matter closer to home. He was summoned to appear before a Clay County grand jury, an experience that he clearly did not take seriously. When approached by reporters who asked him about the significance of the grand jury's investigation, Civella quipped with a sarcastic retort, saying, "This is probably the biggest thing since Jesse James." His dismissive attitude didn't stop there. When he was asked to appear before the grand jury for a second time, reporters inquired why it had taken him 15 minutes to address the panel. Civella's response was laced with his characteristic irreverence. He claimed that he had taken a detour to the men's room, where he was drawing dirty pictures on the wall. His flippant responses and apparent lack of respect for the legal proceedings only added to his notoriety. Law enforcement officials, however, were not amused by Civella's antics or his ability to repeatedly slip through legal loopholes. His sarcastic defiance and seemingly untouchable status only intensified their resolve to monitor him more closely. As a result, he became a prime target for surveillance, with law enforcement agencies keeping a constant watch over his activities for the remainder of his life. Despite his efforts to downplay or mock the authorities' attempts to prosecute him, Civella remained under their scrutiny as they continued to search for any opportunity to bring him to justice. In 1969, Nick Civella's reputation as a key figure in organized crime became official when a Senate committee identified him as a principal member of the Kansas City crime family. His criminal activities, long suspected by authorities, gained increased scrutiny, especially as law enforcement targeted the intricate network of gambling and corruption connected to the mafia. Civella's involvement in illegal gambling would soon come to the forefront when, in January 1970, the FBI intercepted conversations through wiretaps that implicated him and several associates in a gambling conspiracy related to the recent Super Bowl matchup between Kansas City and Minnesota. These wiretaps provided sufficient evidence for indictments, including one against Sol Landai, a notable figure in Kansas City's gambling circles. Sol Landai, facing charges alongside Civella, was compelled to testify before a grand jury after being granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for his cooperation. However, his decision to cooperate with the authorities came at a deadly cost. In November 1970, just months after his grand jury testimony, Landai's home was violently invaded by 4 intruders under the guise of a robbery. What transpired was far more sinister. Landai was brutally murdered, and his wife was subjected to a vicious assault. The true motive behind the invasion was soon uncovered when it was revealed that the assailants had been hired specifically to silence Landai for his testimony. Although the men responsible were quickly apprehended, the crime sent a clear message about the high stakes and deadly consequences of cooperating with the authorities against the mafia. While Civella was not directly implicated in Landai's murder, his legal troubles continued to mount. The gambling charges that had emerged from the January 1970 wiretaps resulted in his conviction in 1975. However, Civella's sentencing was not swift, as he engaged in a prolonged appeals process that kept him out of prison for several years. It wasn't until 1977 that Civella finally began serving his sentence, marking the first time since his early criminal days in the 1920s that he found himself behind bars. Unfortunately, his time in prison was cut short due to significant health issues. During the trial and appeals process, Civella had been battling cancer, which required multiple surgeries, including the removal of pelvic organs. His deteriorating health led to his early release after serving just 20 months. Despite his release, Civella would require further medical treatment, including another surgery in 1978. Civella's involvement in organized crime extended beyond Kansas City, particularly in the complex dealings related to Las Vegas casinos. In 1974, an elaborate scheme unfolded involving multiple mafia families, including those from Kansas City, Cleveland, and Milwaukee. The goal was to secure control of the Stardust and Fremont Hotel casinos in Las Vegas, and the vehicle for this acquisition was the Teamsters Pension Fund. The Teamsters loan was instrumental in Alan Glick's purchase of the casinos, and Civella's sway over Roy Williams, a trustee of the pension fund, proved crucial in securing the necessary financing. Unbeknownst to Glick, the strings attached to this loan went far beyond typical business arrangements. By aligning himself with mob interests, he was effectively relinquishing control over the casino's day-to-day operations. As events unfolded, it became clear that Glick was in over his head. The mob had installed Frank "Lefty" Rosenthal to oversee their financial interests in the casino operations, and when Glick attempted to dismiss Rosenthal, the confrontation took a dangerous turn. Rosenthal responded with threats, prompting Glick to escalate the matter to Frank Balistrieri, the Milwaukee crime boss, in the hopes of finding a solution. Glick's efforts to resolve the conflict did not go as he had hoped. Instead, he was summoned to Kansas City in March 1975 for a meeting with Nick Civella. The meeting took place in a hotel room, where Civella laid out the reality of Glick's situation in no uncertain terms. During this tense encounter, Civella informed Glick that he owed the Kansas City crime family $1.2 million for securing the Teamsters loan. Glick was taken aback, unaware that this was a common expectation when dealing with mob-funded loans, which the mafia treated as their personal bank. Civella's message was clear and foreboding. According to Glick's later accounts, Civella told him, "Cling to every word I say. If it would be my choice, you wouldn't leave this room alive. You owe us $1.2 million. I want that paid. In addition, we own part of your corporation, and you are to do nothing to interfere with it. We will let Mr. Rosenthal continue with the casinos, and you are not to interfere." The gravity of the situation left Glick with no choice but to comply. The reach of Civella's influence in the Las Vegas casino operations extended further, as later testimony revealed the scale of the financial benefits flowing to the mafia. In the mid-1980s, Angelo Leonardo, a former Cleveland crime boss turned government informant, provided crucial information regarding the arrangement. Leonardo disclosed that, on a monthly basis, the mafia families from Cleveland, Kansas City, and Milwaukee each received $40,000 in skim money from Glick's casinos. The funds, siphoned off before being reported as revenue, represented the mob's ongoing profits from their hidden control of the casino operations. Roy Williams, a prominent figure in the Teamsters Union, would later recount how deeply Nick Civella's influence penetrated his life, recounting a chilling episode from the late 1950s. It was shortly after the establishment of the Teamsters Pension Fund, a powerful financial tool that would become a significant resource for the mafia. One night, as Williams left a meeting, he was suddenly grabbed, blindfolded, and forced into a car. He was taken to an unknown location where a bright light was shone in his face, and he was confronted with a life-altering threat. He was bluntly told that if he did not start cooperating with Civella's demands regarding pension fund loans, he and his family would suffer fatal consequences. The menacing warning was clear: "You will be the last to go," implying that his loved ones would be killed first. From that moment on, Williams felt he had no choice but to become what he described as Civella's boy, a subordinate willing to follow orders. His coerced allegiance was further cemented years later, in 1974, when Williams helped approve a substantial loan from the pension fund for Alan Glick, facilitating Glick's purchase of the Stardust and Fremont casinos in Las Vegas. For his cooperation in getting the loan through, Williams admitted to receiving $1,500 in monthly payments from Civella, marking the financial rewards he reaped for staying in line with the mafia's demands. Civella's control over Williams became even more significant as the 1980s approached. In early 1981, as Frank Fitzsimmons, who had been handpicked by the notorious Jimmy Hoffa to succeed him as president of the Teamsters, was nearing death due to cancer, Civella made his influence over Williams known throughout the criminal underworld. By this time, Williams had risen to a high-ranking position within the Teamsters organization, making him a valuable asset for the mob. Civella quickly obtained approval from powerful mafia figures in Chicago and New York, securing Williams' ascension to the presidency of the Teamsters following Fitzsimmons' death in May 1981. This move demonstrated Civella's far-reaching clout and strategic use of alliances to maintain control over significant labor union operations. Yet, Civella's legal troubles were far from over. Shortly after being released from prison on health grounds, he found himself facing new charges, this time for bribery. In November 1978, during a recorded conversation, Civella was caught discussing the bribing of a prison official in order to arrange the transfer of his nephew, Anthony Civella, to a federal prison in Fort Worth. Known for his habit of remaining silent before grand juries and investigative committees, Civella could not evade the consequences this time. The recorded conversation provided solid evidence, leading to his conviction on July 18, 1980, and a 4-year prison sentence. The same month as the recorded bribery discussion, another significant event unfolded, further entangling Civella in legal troubles. The FBI managed to wiretap a 6-hour meeting held in the home of one of Civella's relatives. The recorded conversation covered multiple topics, including detailed discussions about the skimming operations from the Tropicana Casino in Las Vegas and plans involving the elimination of a rival mobster. The meeting itself was made possible by Civella's ability to persuade authorities to grant him a medical release from federal prison. However, this successful ruse would come back to haunt him and his family in the near future when he would genuinely need a medical release during the final months of his life. The evidence collected from the listening devices during these encounters enabled the FBI to act decisively. Using the incriminating information, law enforcement officials revoked Civella's parole, leading to his return to federal custody. He was subsequently sent to Leavenworth Penitentiary, where the authorities continued their surveillance efforts. The FBI went as far as to tap the telephone in the prison's visiting room, revealing that Civella, despite being incarcerated, was still actively involved in directing the affairs of the Kansas City crime family. His conversations provided further proof of his ongoing leadership role and influence within the mob, demonstrating that even imprisonment could not entirely sever his ties to the criminal underworld. In November 1981, a significant blow was dealt to Nick Civella and his criminal network when a federal indictment was issued, naming Civella along with 10 others in a sweeping case that exposed a range of illicit activities. The charges included involvement in skimming operations and concealing ownership interests in the Tropicana Casino, revealing the extent of the mafia's hidden influence over Las Vegas gambling establishments. The investigation that led to the indictment, known as Strawman I, was the culmination of years of FBI surveillance and meticulous evidence gathering. However, as the case was being prepared for trial, Civella's dire health condition forced the courts to sever him from the proceedings, leaving him to face his own legal battles separately from the other defendants. In the final years of his life, Civella was engaged in an ongoing struggle not only against his declining health, but also against the relentless pursuit of justice by federal authorities. His time was largely spent navigating the complexities of the federal court system, where his legal team filed numerous motions in an effort to secure his freedom, or at the very least, to ensure more favorable conditions during his incarceration. His lawyers fought tirelessly to keep him out of prison, to relocate him to facilities better suited for his medical needs, and to advocate for his early release on compassionate grounds. These efforts were bolstered by a petition that garnered the signatures of 800 supporters, including prominent politicians and respected clergymen, who appealed to the authorities, emphasizing Civella's poor health as a reason for leniency. Despite these attempts, the request for Civella's release in 1982 was denied, and his health continued to deteriorate. In February 1983, he was moved from the federal medical facility in Springfield back to Leavenworth, a decision made to facilitate better access to his legal counsel. However, his condition took a rapid turn for the worse just 4 days after the transfer, prompting his return to the medical facility in Springfield for urgent treatment. Recognizing the gravity of his situation, federal authorities decided to release him to his family on March 1st, allowing him to spend his remaining days in a more familiar and compassionate environment. Despite these intentions, Civella's health deteriorated quickly, and he was admitted to the Menorah Medical Center. On March 12, 1983, after a lifetime marked by power, crime, and defiance, Nick Civella succumbed to his ailments. He was laid to rest 3 days later in Kansas City's St. Mary's Cemetery, leaving behind a legacy intertwined with the dark history of organized crime in the Midwest. Throughout his life, Civella had maintained a public persona that starkly contrasted with the information law enforcement gathered through their covert operations. He consistently denied any association with organized crime, presenting himself as a legitimate businessman wrongfully targeted by authorities. In a rare interview conducted in 1970, Civella boldly declared, "I even deny, to my knowledge, that organized crime exists in Kansas City. I am not a joiner. I am not even a member of the Knights of Columbus." His statements reflected an attempt to distance himself from any notion of a structured criminal organization operating under his leadership. Civella's defiance persisted over the years, and in 1979, he once again made public statements aimed at discrediting the allegations against him. He proclaimed, "There isn't any factual, any evidentiary proof anywhere that Nick Civella is the leader or the boss of any criminal organization. I say it in spades, and I say it in double spades that I'm not the head of any kind of organization like that, and there's no proof of such." He did not stop there, going as far as to challenge law enforcement to present any credible evidence that would link him to a criminal enterprise. However, despite his persistent denials and attempts to cast doubt on the existence of organized crime, law enforcement had, in fact, amassed substantial evidence through years of surveillance and investigation. Taped conversations, wiretaps, and informant testimony all pointed to Civella's pivotal role in orchestrating illegal activities, not just within Kansas City but extending to operations in Las Vegas and other regions. These recordings painted a picture of a man who, behind closed doors, wielded significant power and influence within the mafia, coordinating activities and issuing commands that belied his public claims of innocence. The evidence proved unequivocally that Civella was far more than a mere businessman. He was indeed at the helm of a criminal organization whose reach extended deep into American society. The contradictions between Civella's public statements and the reality captured by law enforcement were emblematic of a life lived in the shadows, where deception and denial were as much a part of his strategy as bribery and violence. His repeated efforts to manipulate public perception and evade justice ultimately could not shield him from the consequences of his actions. Even as his health failed him and the end of his life drew near, the weight of his criminal endeavors remained evident, casting a long shadow over the final chapter of a life that had been deeply entangled in the underworld.